A massive car bomb exploded outside of a large federal building in downtown Oklahoma City.
It hurts deep down as to why someone would do something of this magnitude.
The indictment charges that Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, former Army buddies with a grudge against the government.
On April 19th, 1995, a man named Timothy McVeigh parked a moving truck in front of the Alfred Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The truck was a bomb containing the volatile combination of fertilizers, diesel fuel, and other chemicals. After lighting a timed fuse, McVeigh got in a getaway car and drove away. The bomb exploded, destroying the federal building and damaging 324 other buildings, injuring more than 650 other people, and killing 168, 19 of whom were children who were spending the day at the Federal Center's daycare center.
McVeigh was pulled over about an hour and a half after the bombing by an Oklahoma State trooper who noticed a missing license plate on his car. He was actually already in jail by the time they connected him to the bombing. But this video isn't about catching a terrorist, it's about creating one. The Oklahoma City bombing happened when we were 4 years old, so we've known the name Timothy McVeigh almost all our lives. But he did not become the face of white supremacist terrorism the same way that, say, Osama bin Laden became the face of Muslim extremism in the early 2000s.
But McVeigh was hardly a lone wolf, as the nightly news often portrays white terrorists. He's part of a movement, the product of a very purposeful radicalization process that is still working today. And it's working effectively today, partially because white power groups fly so much under the radar. Even the FBI's website, which we used while researching this video, gives only one line of text to McVeigh's extremism, describing them only as extremist ideologies, which is incredibly vague. Without being explicit and very open about white power movements, their methods, and their symbols which they use to hide, there are certain to be more Timothy McVeighs being created right now.
Hi, I'm Dan.
And I'm Jake, and we're both public high school teachers. Whenever we can, we try to educate our students on hate through Holocaust literature, because generally they know very little about it. According to a 2020 study, almost 2/3 of young American adults don't know that 6 million Jewish people were killed in the Holocaust. Almost half couldn't name a concentration camp or ghetto, and almost a quarter said that they thought the Holocaust was exaggerated or was completely a myth. In our own classrooms, we've had students say they understood Adolf Hitler to be a terrorist or even a fictional character. But let me be clear, that's not their fault. They don't know unless we teach them.
More than half of the young respondents to that survey said that they had seen Nazi symbols on social media, but didn't know that's what they were. That's what we'd like to talk to you about today. This isn't an exhaustive history of white supremacy or of its symbols, but it covers some of the ones you're most likely to see. Now, to understand where white supremacy sits in our society today, we have to go back to the beginning of the modern white power movement.
The modern white power movement really begins in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, as the psychological wound of losing that conflict was exploited by white supremacist groups to recruit members. Author Kathleen Belew said in her book, Bringing the War Home, The White Power Movement and Paramilitary America, people in the white power movement claimed soldiers had been wronged by the U.S. government, and they therefore needed to bring that war back to the U.S.
But Timothy McVeigh's road through the white power movement begins later, with two seemingly unrelated events. One of those was the 1992 Ruby Ridge standoff in Idaho, where ATF agents engaged in a firefight with a white supremacist named Randy Weaver for a number of reasons, including illegal weapons sales. 30 years later, and from a layman's outside perspective, it seems like U.S. Marshals handled the situation poorly, killing Weaver's wife and dog in the 11-day standoff. Many white supremacists said they saw themselves reflected in Randy Weaver's cause at that moment, especially Timothy McVeigh, who saw this moment as confirmation that the government was tyrannically anti-gun, anti-militia, and was coming for people like him next.
The other event was the much more famous Waco, Texas siege of the Branch Davidians, which also began with the ATF raiding a compound. The Branch Davidians were an apocalyptic doomsday cult, whose compound you could see from a nearby hill, and people gathered there to watch. Tim McVeigh went to Waco to observe the event, and he sold pro-gun, anti-government bumper stickers with swastikas on them. McVeigh, as well as a large patchwork of far-right militias and white power groups, saw Waco as a galvanizing moment. Before he was executed in 2001, McVeigh made it clear that he attacked Oklahoma City on the second anniversary of the Waco siege to connect the two events in the public's mind.
McVeigh studied the tactics of previous white supremacist attacks and was a huge fan of the Turner Diaries, which is famous for being one of the most militantly and disgustingly racist books ever written. But like we said earlier, McVeigh did not suddenly become the face of white supremacy in America, in part because news reports on Oklahoma City focused so much on the individual John Does who perpetrated the attack, and partially because the FBI changed its policies following Ruby Ridge and Waco. Instead of investigating white terrorism as a part of an ideology, they chose to focus only on prosecuting individual crimes due to the ire they drew following those two previous standoffs.
So by the late 90s, national law enforcement was actively ignoring white supremacy as any kind of pattern. And then their focus shifted entirely. After September 11th, 2001, resources for stopping terrorism were moved completely away from domestic terrorism to international terrorism, mostly from the Middle East. In the Islamophobic public consciousness of the new millennium, the term terrorist almost exclusively meant Muslim men from the Middle East. By 2005, the FBI had no focus on white supremacist groups at all. In fact, the biggest domestic terror threat that the FBI was investigating was a militant animal rights group. In 2008, the day after Barack Obama was elected president, the white power website Stormfront saw a 500% increase in traffic.
Speaking of Stormfront, they know the best way for them to operate is covertly, spreading racist and anti-Semitic views out of the spotlight. Derek Black is the son of the founder of Stormfront, Don Black, and used to operate the kids section of the website. Derek is now an anti-racist speaker and author, and said of his time as a white supremacist, "I knew from the time I was a child that white nationalism, as long as it was not necessarily calling itself white nationalism, could win campaigns. So I did things like run little county elections to demonstrate that I could win the majority of the vote using white nationalist talking points in a very normal South Florida neighborhood. I ran training sessions on how people could hone their message to try to get that audience, not freak people out, and just tap into things like, don't you think all these Spanish signs on the highway are making everything worse? And don't you think political correctness is just not letting you talk about things that are real?"
Derek hid his white power beliefs when he went to college and accidentally befriended another student who was Jewish, who ultimately helped him shed his hateful views. It's an incredible story, and if you're interested, you should check out the book about it, called Rising Out of Hatred by Eli Saslow. Now, since the Obama presidency, we've seen a huge influx of white supremacist ideals in the mainstream, and we've seen many acts of white intimidation and terrorism, like January 6th, 2021, the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol.
The white power movement today is a vast network of groups, taking the shape of government-hating militias like the Oath Keepers, really dangerous neo-Nazis like the Atomwaffen Division, Western chauvinist groups like the Proud Boys, MAGA enthusiasts, QAnon conspiracists, and internet subcultures like incels. They're not all the same group, and their goals don't always align. They're kind of hard to keep track of and keep separate from one another. And this is because of the leaderless resistance model pioneered by people like Louis Beam and used by Timothy McVeigh in the Oklahoma City bombing. This is by design.
Now, groups splinter quickly, and tactics change. Individual actors will sometimes lampshade their beliefs by saying it's just dark humor, or actively muddy the waters about what they believe through social media. They become very adept at hiding their beliefs inside more palatable rhetoric, avoiding scrutiny from law enforcement, and quietly pushing their perspective more into the mainstream without the public at large even realizing it. So we need to become adept at seeing it and strong in denouncing it.
Nazi symbols that are easily recognized are easily discouraged. White supremacists know this, so they now use icons that are more subtle and discreet because they're less likely to be identified as symbols of hate. Everyone knows the swastika, and everyone knows it to be taboo, to say the least, so groups stopped using it. Take the Dominion movement, for example. This stylized eagle is an adaptation of the Reichsadler, the imperial eagle used by Nazi Germany. You'll still see that eagle used in white supremacist rallies today.
The Dominion movement name appears to come from the concept of dominionism, a term applied to conservative Christian sects seeking political and social power. Then look down to the three words below: family, community, and nation. Those things don't seem inherently bad by themselves. However, if you're familiar with white power groups, for them, these concepts always refer to a strongly patriarchal and heteronormative white family, a community of an imagined past which is unpolluted by multiculturalism, an exclusively white nation. If a group says they want to protect homelands or nations without explicitly stating which nation, be cautious.
If you look at another Dominion movement poster, you'll see the eagle again swooping down with the phrase, "We will not be replaced." Now, this poster doesn't use any overt slander against the targeted groups, but it does imply fear that your family, your community, and your place in your nation are at stake, which is a common racist lie. Prosperity is not a zero-sum game, and white people are less at risk than any other ethnic group. These all hint at the idea of white genocide, or replacement theory, which is one of the central white supremacist talking points. If you listen carefully, you'll see ideas like this repeated by people like Tucker Carlson on Fox News.
Have shown absolute contempt for our customs, our laws. The Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate. If you change the population, you dilute the political power of the people who live there.
Another symbol used to covertly convey white power ideologies is a black X mark that stretches across a white background. This is an abstraction of the Confederate battle flag. It was first widely used at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. The event was sort of a touchstone for moving white supremacy into the mainstream. You can see it here on their shields and elsewhere on their flags with a lot of other symbols we'll get to shortly.
The Celtic cross, sometimes called the Iron Cross, is a popular symbol for American skinheads to use. It's often accompanied by the more obviously racist phrase, "white pride worldwide." This man, Wade Michael Page, shot and killed 6 people in a Sikh temple in 2012, because in addition to being racist and violent, he wasn't smart enough to know that Sikh people aren't Muslims. He has a tattoo with both the Celtic cross and the number 14, which you'll see again in a minute.
Now, the symbol you see here is called a fasces, first used in Rome to represent the imperial power of the state. It's the root of the word fascism. It even shows up in other places, like here is our state of Colorado's official seal. The fasces isn't only used by white supremacist groups, but it is used by a lot of them. This man, James Alex Fields Jr., would get into his car about an hour after this picture was taken and drive into a crowd of counter-protesters, killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer and injuring dozens of others. You may notice the Ohio license plate here, even though this took place in Virginia. Yeah, he drove 8 hours across state lines to do this.
The OK hand sign has been adopted by the polo and khakis brand of white supremacists in recent years, with the 3 extended fingers making the W and the index finger and thumb making the P. Now you might be thinking, no, they showed us that in scuba lessons. That just means OK. Amongst the general public, citing this as a hate symbol has received a lot of pushback and been called silly. But how do you explain pictures like this? If this isn't a symbol with some deeper meaning, why are all these guys so excited to tell us how okay they are?
It's simultaneously incredibly stupid and incredibly consequential.
The Ultharoon is one that you might have seen as recently as the conspicuously shaped stage at CPAC this year. Now, we're not entirely sure if that was just some massively unfortunate stage design or if it was intended. And that's part of the problem with Dogwhistles. It gives someone plausible deniability. The Ultharoon is a pro-Germanic symbol that indicates an O sound and stands for estate, property, and inheritance. But the Nazis adopted the Ultharoon to have a sort of feet like a serif. So here, it's not talking about your grandpa's will. This inheritance is more about a mystical bond between white people and their imagined homeland. Ancient runes like this one were used by the Nazis to suggest an unbroken, pure lineage between the past and the present to imply that their ideas of racial supremacy had always been around and always had historical weight.
In 1933, the Nazi Party made Blut und Boden, or blood and soil an official party policy. Farmers needed a certificate proving they were a member of the Aryan race in order to reap the benefits from the law. This idea is expressed a little more covertly via the Othala rune. The National Socialist movement, which is the largest neo-Nazi group in the United States, used to use the swastika on their flags and shields, but that was updated with the Othala rune in 2016 to appear more mainstream. At the 2017 Unite the Right rally, you could see a lot of marchers with the fasces on their shield chanting, "Blood and soil." Blood and soil! Blood and soil! There were a lot of symbols like this at the January 6th Capitol insurrection of this year.
With the Othal rune, the fasces, the OK sign, the blood and soil chants, the black X, and other dog whistles, white supremacists are signaling to one another who they are and what their goals are, while maintaining much more anonymity than swastikas and Nazi armbands would allow. Those who may be potentially sympathetic to their cause can become more comfortable with seeing these symbols and may even begin building relationships with those who use them. A generally dissatisfied white guy who, of course, doesn't self-identify as a racist, but maybe doesn't really like that kids are required to get a Spanish credit to graduate high school, may listen with his defenses down a bit more than if people at the rally had led off with, "Hitler was right." Because they do believe Hitler was right, and that's the point they'll try to get to once they've ingratiated themselves enough with this dissatisfied customer.
Numbers are often used to mask hateful slogans. A similar concept to blood and soil is commonly represented by the number 28, with the 2 representing the second letter of the alphabet B, and the 8 representing the 8th letter of the alphabet H. 28, or BH, stands for blood and honor. Blut und Ehre, that same phrase in German, appeared on the standard issue knives for Hitler Youth.
The number 88 likewise represents 2 H's, to be short for Heil Hitler. You can see this 88 tattoo on the back of this woman's left hand as PBS NewsHour interviews her about her organizing for the 2016 Trump campaign. On her right hand, you can see the Iron Cross. And 88 doesn't always stand for 2 H's. Some internet communities have used it to mean hugs and kisses. But considering her Iron Cross tattoo, as well as the fact that she's organizing for Donald Trump, who energized, supported, and sympathized with white nationalists.
Very fine people on both sides. Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
This woman very likely has more than a passing familiarity with white supremacy.
You'll often see 88 combined with another number, 14, or 14 words, which represents one of the most insidious white supremacist slogans we can think of. The 14 words are a shorthand for a neo-Nazi slogan about securing a future for specifically white children. You can see it here on this shield and on this banner combined with the number 88. Some time ago, I was talking to some high school students about problematic views. And these students, who were all very intelligent kids, believed that no matter how horrid a person's views are, even if they are a self-described Nazi, you have to respect them and you have to let them have a seat at the table. It's a popular refrain today that because America is so divided left and right, that the correct answer must always be somewhere in the middle. This might be true sometimes, but it is not always the case. White supremacist views are unacceptable. You should not debate them, and you cannot compromise with them.
This is not an issue of free speech. You cannot be accepting of hate until it spreads and then hope to somehow stop it at that point. Even if white supremacist beliefs were somehow not inherently harmful, which they are, they often lead to accelerationism, or what's called forcing the end. Dan Olson lays this out really well in his documentary, In Search of a Flat Earth, that it's not that big of a logical leap for someone who's been steeped in extremist rhetoric to decide that they need to take matters into their own hands to bring about a government insurrection or a race war. In your home and your community, you need to be vocally against white supremacy, because if you're not, you're creating danger for anyone they deem unacceptable, which is a lot of people.
We've seen this firsthand. Jake and I play music in Denver, and venues that don't have a history of making hatred unacceptable have had a serious problem with Nazis getting comfortable there. Here's actual Nazi James Mason hanging out outside the venue Streets Denver, which was soft on Nazis for a long time. The safest spaces, in our experience, are the ones in which hate is most vocally denounced and anti-fascism is most readily promoted.
According to the New York Times, roughly 22 million Americans found neo-Nazi or white supremacist beliefs as acceptable following the Unite the Right rally in 2017. That's about 10% of the adult population in the United States. There isn't an easy solution to this problem because it's bigger than you or me. But we know for a fact that they are organizing. They are spreading propaganda, and they are dangerous. So we need to organize, we need to educate, and we need to push back, because history is a really good teacher, and it's taught us that the end goal of hate is always the same. There's no white power movement whose goals, stated or otherwise, are limited to let's make sure white people have good jobs. In the end, it's always genocide.
I think this comic sums up our position pretty well. I think as someone who's not immediately threatened by white supremacy, our chance as allies to educate others is a valuable opportunity that we have to take. Because white supremacists are going to take every chance they can get to talk about black-on-black crime or racist nonsense like that. I'd ask that the next time your favorite sports team postpones a game because of events in the news, sit with it for a little bit. They're trying to get your attention. The next time people are saying Black Lives Matter as they march down your street, ask why they're angry. Empathize. And if you want to get involved, we've included a couple of links down below to get in touch with your local Anti-Defamation League chapter and identify hate groups in your area. And since we're English teachers, we thought we might leave you with 2 quotes from great authors. Arthur Miller said, "Fear doesn't travel well, so we have to educate. And it's urgent we do so because, according to Faulkner, the past isn't dead. It isn't even past."
The racist got a PR firm, hired men in fancy shirts but have the same ideology. We've had to say a lot of stuff we thought was fucking obvious, like yes, it's okay to